In 1806, a 23-year-old Bostonian filled a ship with something that cost him nothing and became one of the richest men in America. Water was free, but ice made millionaires. This is the story of how frozen pond water built a global empire worth hundreds of millions in today's dollars and changed what the entire world ate and drank forever. Frederic Tudor didn't invent ice. He cut it from his family's pond using saws and shipped 130 tons of it to Martinique in the Caribbean. The newspapers called it a joke. No ship captain would carry it because they thought the melting ice would sink their vessels. He lost $4,500 on that first voyage, which is roughly $120,000 today. He went bankrupt. He was thrown into debtor's prison. But by the 1850s, 140,000 tons of ice were leaving Massachusetts every year, reaching Calcutta, Singapore, Hong Kong, and 50 cities across the world. Ships carrying ice crossed the equator twice and arrived months later with cargo that hadn't existed as a commodity in human history until that moment. By the time Tudor died in 1864, he was worth $200 million in today's money. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how a substance that melted in your hand became more valuable than gold in the tropics, and how that single transformation gave birth to the entire global food economy we live inside today. Frederic Tudor came from a wealthy Boston family. His father had studied law in John Adams' office and served as George Washington's first Judge Advocate General. The Tudors had an ice house on their family estate in Saugus, Massachusetts, a luxury reserved for the wealthy. On summer evenings, they drank cold punches and ate ice cream, treats that were completely unknown to 99% of humanity. One night in 1805, after a visit to the Caribbean where he'd witnessed the oppressive heat, Tudor had an idea that seemed insane. He would harvest ice from his family's pond and ship it to the tropics. His family thought he'd lost his mind. His brother William initially joined him in the scheme, but quit after the first disaster. The Boston Gazette announced the maiden voyage with mockery. "No joke," they wrote. "A vessel with a cargo of ice has cleared for Martinique. We hope this will not prove a slippery speculation." In February 1806, Tudor loaded the brig Favorite with 130 tons of ice at Gray's Wharf in Charlestown. He had sent his brother William ahead to Martinique to secure buyers and build an ice house. But when the ship arrived after 3 weeks at sea, Tudor discovered William had accomplished neither task. The ice survived the journey relatively intact, but there was nowhere to store it. Nobody in Martinique had ever seen ice. They didn't understand what it was or what to do with it. The blocks sat on the docks, melting in the Caribbean sun, while Tudor watched his fortune literally evaporate. He lost $4,500, roughly $120,000 today. That single voyage wiped out a fortune. Most men would have stopped. Tudor didn't just continue, he doubled down. The following year, he sent 240 tons to Havana, another failure. Then another shipment, then another. Each time, ice melted. Each time, he lost money. His father's real estate investments collapsed. Tudor was drowning in debt. In 1812, a business partner swindled him. He was thrown into debtor's prison, twice. His family was humiliated. Boston society laughed at the Ice King, a nickname that began as an insult. But prison gave Tudor time to think. He realized his mistake. He wasn't just selling ice. He was trying to create a market for something nobody knew they wanted. It wasn't enough to deliver the product. He had to teach people how to use it. When he got out of prison, Tudor changed his strategy. He built ice houses in every port before shipping ice there. Massive structures with double walls packed with sawdust for insulation. The sawdust was a waste product from New England lumber mills, essentially free. He gave ice away for free to bartenders in Havana for an entire year, teaching them how to make cocktails, cold mint juleps, sherry cobblers, drinks that had never existed before because they required ice. He taught cafe owners how to make ice cream. He gave away blocks to hospitals who discovered that ice could reduce fevers and save lives. He was manufacturing demand. By 1815, he had secured monopoly rights from the Spanish government to sell ice in Havana. The city was addicted. They needed ice, and Tudor was the only supplier. He was finally making money. But there was still a fundamental problem. harvesting ice was brutally inefficient. Men used pickaxes and handsaws to cut irregular blocks from frozen ponds. The work was slow, dangerous, and expensive. Ice cost 30 cents per ton to harvest, about $7 today. The economics barely worked. Then, in 1825, a man named Nathaniel Jarvis Wyeth changed everything. Wyeth was the son of a hotel owner in Cambridge. He'd been harvesting ice from Fresh Pond to stock his father's ice house every winter. The work was backbreaking, so Wyeth invented a horse-drawn ice cutter with two parallel blades that scored the ice in perfect grids. The tool looked like a plow, but for frozen water. Suddenly, workers could cut uniform square blocks in minutes instead of hours. The uniform blocks stacked perfectly, maximizing storage and minimizing surface area exposed to air, which slowed melting. Wyeth's invention reduced harvesting costs from 30 cents per ton to just 10 cents, about $2.50 today. Ice became 3 times cheaper to produce overnight. Tudor hired Wyeth immediately, paying him $500 per year, roughly $13,000 today, to manage the harvest. Wyeth didn't stop there. He invented a pulley system with 2 platforms on opposite ends of a beam. While one platform lifted ice from the water, the other descended to be loaded. The system doubled the speed of loading. Then he invented double-walled ice houses with sawdust insulation that could preserve ice for a full year. These technological breakthroughs meant Tudor could finally scale. By the 1830s, he was shipping ice to Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, and across the Caribbean. But he wanted more. In 1833, at the age of 30, Tudor received a proposal from a Boston merchant named Samuel Austin. Austin had a fleet of ships sailing regularly to Calcutta. He suggested they ship ice to India. The voyage was 16,000 miles, 4 months at sea. The ship would cross the equator twice. Ice had never survived such a journey. Most people thought it was impossible. Tudor signed the deal immediately. On May 12, 1833, the brig Tuscany departed Boston with 180 tons of ice packed in sawdust. The ship sailed south around Cape Horn, across the South Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, and into the Indian Ocean. 4 months later, on September 13th, it arrived in Calcutta with 100 tons of ice still frozen solid. The arrival caused a sensation. British colonial elites in Calcutta had been suffering in the brutal heat for generations. They had tried making ice locally using a primitive method called hoogly slush. They would fill clay pots with water and leave them outside overnight during winter. Evaporation would cool the water enough to form a thin layer of soft, cloudy ice by morning. It was inferior and expensive. Tudor's ice was crystal clear. You could read a newspaper through it. The blocks were solid and dense. And somehow, despite traveling 16,000 miles, Tudor's ice was cheaper than the local slush. The British couldn't believe it. They bought everything. Tudor built massive stone ice houses in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras to store inventory. The India trade became his most profitable market. Between 1833 and 1850, Tudor made an estimated $220,000 in profit from India alone, roughly $7 million today. Word spread across the British Empire. Ice ships began sailing to Singapore, Hong Kong, Rangoon, and Australia. But Tudor wasn't the only player anymore. Norwegian entrepreneurs adopted the same technology, shipping ice to Britain and across Europe. By the 1850s, the ice trade had become massive. In 1856 alone, American ships exported 146,000 tons of ice to 53 different cities across 6 continents. Ice rivaled cotton in economic importance. An estimated 90,000 people were employed in harvesting. Hudson River warehouses stretched for miles, storing millions of tons. Ice was no longer a luxury, it was a necessity, because ice had transformed how people ate. Before ice, food spoilage killed thousands every summer. Bacterial infections from spoiled meat and milk caused something called summer complaint, the second leading cause of death in American cities. People couldn't store fresh chicken or fish for more than a few hours. Milk had to stay in the cow until you were ready to drink it. Ice changed that. Ice boxes allowed families to preserve meat, dairy, and produce for days instead of hours. Butchers could store inventory. Fishermen could make longer voyages and bigger catches because they could pack fish in ice. Farmers could ship fresh fruit and vegetables hundreds of miles to cities. The entire food supply chain was rebuilt around ice. And then, the railroads discovered they could pack ice into specialized refrigerated cars called reefers. Suddenly, cattle could be slaughtered in Chicago, butchered, and the dressed meat could be shipped to New York packed in ice. Before refrigerated rail cars, live cattle had to be transported across the country, which was expensive and dangerous. Refrigerated transport meant centralized meat packing. It meant national distribution of perishable goods. The modern food industry was born from ice. But ice didn't just preserve food, it transformed culture. Cold drinks became standard in America. Iced tea, iced coffee, cocktails with ice. Ice cream became mass-produced. Hospitals used ice to treat fevers and save lives. Tudor had proven his thesis. Once people tasted cold drinks, they could never go back. The demand was permanent. He married a woman 30 years younger in 1834, had 6 children, and became one of the richest men in America. But his empire was built on a melting foundation. By the 1840s, inventors had been experimenting with artificial refrigeration for decades. In 1844, a Florida doctor named John Gorey invented the first mechanical ice-making machine to cool hospital rooms for yellow fever patients. His machine used compressed air to create ice. Gorey secured a U.S. patent in 1851, but his invention failed commercially. Ice was too cheap and abundant. Natural ice harvested from ponds cost almost nothing to produce. Gorey's machines required expensive coal to power compressors. The economics didn't work. Tudor allegedly spread rumors that artificial ice was contaminated with bacteria. Gorey died in 1855, financially ruined and humiliated. But the technology didn't die with him. In France, an inventor named Ferdinand Carré independently developed a similar ammonia-based refrigeration machine and patented it in 1859. Then, in 1861, the American Civil War began. The Union Navy blockaded southern ports. Ice shipments from the north stopped. Southern cities that had become dependent on ice suddenly faced a crisis. They had built entire industries around refrigeration. Without ice, they couldn't brew lager beer year-round. They couldn't preserve meat. They couldn't cool hospitals. Out of desperation, southern businessmen smuggled Carré's ice machines through the blockade. The machines used ammonia as a refrigerant and could produce 182 kilograms of ice per hour. By 1870, the southern states were producing more artificial ice than anyone in the world. The shift had begun. Artificial ice didn't depend on winter weather. It could be produced year-round. And as cities industrialized, natural waterways became polluted. Concerns about typhoid spread. By 1900, ice plants were producing more than 1 million pounds per day. Breweries adopted mechanical refrigeration. Meat packers installed chilling plants. Refrigerated ships replaced ice-packed holds. By 1914, more plant ice was being produced than natural ice. World War I disrupted shipping. The interwar period saw mass adoption of electric refrigerators. Why buy ice from an iceman when you could make it in your kitchen? By the 1950s, the ice delivery industry was dead. The global ice trade that had employed 90,000 people simply vanished. Frederic Tudor died in 1864, at the height of the ice trade, worth $200 million in today's currency. He never saw the industry's collapse. His obituary called him a visionary who had created an industry from nothing. And that's the truth. Tudor took a substance that melted in your hand and convinced the world it was indispensable. He didn't invent ice, but he invented the ice trade. He built the infrastructure. He created the demand. He proved it was possible to ship frozen water across the equator and make millions doing it. And in doing so, he built the foundation for the entire cold chain that governs modern life. Every refrigerated truck, every cold storage warehouse, every supermarket with fresh seafood and strawberries in December, every restaurant with ice in your water glass, every vaccine that requires refrigeration. All of it traces back to a 23-year-old who looked at a frozen pond and saw a global empire. The ice houses still stand in a few places. In Chennai, India, there's a massive stone structure Tudor built in the 1840s. It's a monument to an industry that no longer exists. But the legacy isn't the buildings. The legacy is the expectation. The expectation that food should be fresh, that drinks should be cold, that summer shouldn't kill you. Tudor gave the world the gift of cold, and once you have it, you can never go back. The ice trade proves something that echoes across every transformation in history. The product wasn't the point, the infrastructure was. Tudor didn't just sell ice. He built ice houses, he trained bartenders, he created distribution networks, he educated markets. He turned a curiosity into a necessity by making it accessible. And when artificial refrigeration arrived, it didn't destroy what Tudor built, it completed it. The ice trade was always a bridge technology, a temporary solution between natural scarcity and mechanical abundance. But that bridge changed everything. It showed humanity what was possible. It proved you could preserve food across continents. It demonstrated that cold was valuable enough to build industries around. And when mechanical refrigeration finally arrived, the world was ready for it, because Tudor had already taught them to want it. That's the real genius. Tudor didn't predict the future. He created the market for it. He made the impossible seem inevitable. And by the time his empire melted away, it had already transformed into something permanent. The cold chain that moves 70% of the food you eat. The refrigerators humming in 1.5 billion homes. The frozen supply chains that make modern civilization possible. All of it started with a man who looked at winter and saw summer, who looked at abundance and saw scarcity, who looked at a frozen pond and saw the world.